Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for taking time out of what I know are busy days. You have a choice in terms of where you spend your time, especially during this block between semesters at school. And I appreciate very much you taking time to spend it with us today. We're going to be talking about over the next 45 minutes or so a topic that I think is not going to be foreign to you, that is COVID, and specifically what we now are able to discuss as compared with last year, COVID vaccines. This gives us the opportunity to be back in school. It ultimately will give us the opportunity to be back in person for next year's course for school nursing, so that, as Ginger said, we will be able to see one another again. It allows us to get back to normal. But there's only one catch, and that is, in order to do that, you got to actually have the vaccine in people's arms. And it's sitting on a shelf isn't going to get us through the pandemic. Vaccinating people is going to get us through the pandemic. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is going to be about vaccines in adolescents. That's the most recent data we have that would be applicable to the patients that we serve, the youth that we serve in schools. But I am also going to spend a little bit of time talking about the vaccines that we have available to us in adults, because you all also are critically important. It doesn't do anyone any good if you're on a ventilator in a hospital, least of all you, in terms of what it means for moving a community through this pandemic. So first and foremost, you fellow teachers in schools, administrators in schools, need to be vaccinated to protect yourselves and to limit the amount of virus spreading within a school. And then, as age allows, the youth that are in that school as well, the students themselves, need to be vaccinated. So with that, I think we're going to activate the slides, and there'll be just a moment where we get things set in place and we will be underway. All right. In terms of disclosures, I have none that I think are relevant to vaccine development. I should mention this, I am the American Academy of Pediatrics Red Book liaison to the Centers for Disease Control Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP. And I've been in that role since 2007. So that means that each of the times that the ACIP or the AAP, for that matter, is looking at issues related to COVID vaccination, authorization of vaccines, who should receive vaccines, what the safety profile of the vaccines look like, what the disease underlying rates are, and so forth, that I'm in that room as well. And that's been helpful, I think, in terms of being able to pull together information that I'll be presenting to y'all over the next 40 or 45 minutes. In terms of research, all of my research is funded by the NIH, with rare exception. There is one study that I'm involved with right now that's sponsored by Gilead. It's a SARS-CoV-2 or COVID study of remdesivir, the antiviral drug that's been shown to be beneficial in adults. And I'm the site principal investigator for the remdesivir study, pediatric study that Gilead is conducting. All monies go to UAB, they don't go to me, but I mention it because it's related to COVID. This slide is one that you're going to see several times, but with additional kind of call out boxes there. And what it describes is the different kinds of vaccines that are available. And by this, I mean the platform, the fundamental way that the vaccine works. And what you can see is in these sort of pill-shaped colored ovals, the different types of vaccines. So for instance, one is an attenuated live pathogen vaccine. That would be where you take a virus and just weaken it. There's none of those for SARS-CoV-2. Second would be inactivated pathogen vaccines, where you take the virus, in this case, just kill it, and use that to inject into a person. There are a few of those, not in the United States. We'll work our way through that. C is the protein subunit vaccine. There are some very promising developments here. The Novavax vaccine, which has been getting a fair amount of attention in the press these last few days, is a protein subunit vaccine. Your hepatitis B vaccine that we've all had, that's a protein subunit vaccine, to give you an idea of an example. Virus-like particles, or VLP vaccines. There are not any of those that are authorized or approved for SARS-CoV-2 as a COVID vaccine, in other words. But the VLP vaccines the most prominent ones are the HPV vaccines, human papillomavirus vaccines. Viral vector vaccines. This is one we're going to talk quite a bit about because there's some really great developments for COVID vaccines that use this backbone. DNA vaccines would not apply here because these are RNA viruses. And then the mRNA vaccines is one that we're going to be receiving a lot of talk about, and one that, you know, for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, something you're already very much aware of. So I'm going to come back to this slide, but first I'm going to go through what vaccines are either approved or authorized anywhere in the world, and several slides of those that are in development. So if we look at authorized or approved vaccines globally, so this is not just the United States, this is anywhere in the world, there are 18 such vaccines that are authorized or approved somewhere. And this includes the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, the BNT162b2 vaccine. It includes the Moderna mRNA vaccine, which is called mRNA 1273. It includes the AstraZeneca vaccine. That one's not authorized in the United States, but is receiving a lot of attention around the world. The AstraZeneca vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine. Rather, it is a non-replicating chimpanzee adenovirus vector vaccine. So what they do there is they take a chimpanzee adenovirus. Adenoviruses just kind of cause common colds. And they inactivate it in such a way that it cannot reproduce itself. So it essentially becomes a car that allows the contents of that car, the occupants of that car, to get into a cell, open the car doors, let the occupant, in this case it is messenger RNA for the spike protein of COVID, to let that out of the car, and then the cellular machinery begins to make the spike protein that generates the immune response. So it's a different way of getting mRNA, spike protein mRNA, into the cell, compared with the mRNA vaccines, where the mRNA itself is simply put inside a lipid bubble or a fat bubble, and that directly moves into the cell. I'm going to drop down on the next slide to talk about the J&J vaccine. To finish out this slide, there's a Sputnik and a Sputnik Light. These are Russian vaccines. They also use the recombinant adenovirus vector with or without an adjuvant. The J&J vaccine, like the AstraZeneca vaccine, is a non-replicating human adenovirus vector vaccine. AstraZeneca's chimp adenovirus, J&J is a human adenovirus. Like the AstraZeneca vaccine, the J&J vaccine has been altered so that it cannot reproduce itself. It cannot replicate. Instead, it's that car that's driving the mRNA that it contains inside into the cell. Doors open up, mRNA comes out. It tells the cellular machinery to make the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that causes COVID. That spike protein moves to the surface of the cell, and the immune system sees that and mounts an immune response to that spike protein. And then a person, whether it be with the mRNA vaccines or these viral vector vaccines, the person's immune system then is ready if and when it sees the SARS-CoV-2 wild type virus. So that rather than getting really, really sick from the SARS-CoV-2 virus and getting COVID disease, the immune system shuts it down before a person can get that sick. And they are remarkably effective vaccines. That is not to say that every single person that receives the vaccine will have a robust immune response. There are small percentages of people that do not. It could be just by chance. It also could be somebody who's on chemotherapy, for instance, or on steroids, or on immunomodulating drugs for rheumatoid arthritis. Those are examples of situations where a person's immune system already is weakened, putting them at higher risk of COVID disease, bad outcomes, death, and so forth from COVID disease. And unfortunately, it also can decrease their immune response to the vaccines that can be used. That's why, and I'm going to get to this over and over and over again, that's why it's so important that all of us be vaccinated. We're doing it for ourselves. We're doing it to protect ourselves, but we're also doing it to protect the teachers or the lunchroom workers or the custodians or the administrators, the principals and so forth in your schools, or you for that matter, in your schools. Because unless we all are vaccinated or enough of us are vaccinated, this virus will continue to circulate. It is continuing to circulate. And the more it circulates, the more it has an opportunity to adapt, to change, these variants that we're hearing about are examples of that, so that our immune systems have a harder time controlling it. So time is of the essence here to get as many people vaccinated as will be willing to get vaccinated. The other the other vaccines that are authorized or approved include vaccines from China, from Russia, from India, additional vaccines from China and Russia, and also Uzbekistan. And then finally, Kazakhstan, China, Iran, and China. And a lot of these you'll see are inactivated vaccines. I'm going to spend a little bit of time after I run quickly through the 86 vaccines that are in development. That's right, 86 vaccines that are in development, and kind of categorize each of these using that visual image that I had just a bit ago to show where these vaccines fit, these 18 authorized or approved vaccines fit with respect to their platform. Now, these are the 86 vaccine candidates that are in development. Many of them are in very advanced stages, phase 3 stage of development. The ones that I want to bring your attention to really are relatively few on this slide. One is the Novavax vaccine. This one has had data released, at least in terms of press releases, very recently, and it looks really, really good. Basically as good as the mRNA vaccines and the J&J vaccine, perhaps with some fewer side effects. And the side effects that are happening are mild, or relatively speaking, compared with those other vaccines. So this is one to keep your eye on, because I think it's going to, whether it plays a role in the United States or not, perhaps is a bit of an open-ended question, but I think it will play a role when it comes to the rest of the world. And as I will mention, although it won't be on the slide, it is a protein subunit vaccine that is put into a nanoparticle. So it's classified here as a nanoparticle vaccine, but it really is like a protein subunit type of vaccine. And you can see other names of developing groups all the way down. Many of them are large pharma companies, GSK, Sanofi as examples. Some are academia, Baylor College of Medicine. Some are governmental, and so forth. So I'm just going to run through this slide very quickly, these slides very quickly, to give you a sense. Several studies, vaccine candidates that are in phase 2-3 studies or phase 2 studies. Down near the bottom are some that are in phase 1, 2, and 3 studies. Moving on through different types of platforms. I will mention briefly, a couple of these vaccines are intranasal. This is obviously not injected, which is perhaps an interesting kind of a platform and approach that would be useful going forward as we move into and through this pandemic. And one of those vaccines, this Altimmune vaccine, has been developed in collaboration with UAB, actually. Fran Lund in microbiology has done much of the preclinical work with this particular vaccine. It's a US vaccine that's in phase 1 studies right now. All right, let's move back to this slide. I'm going to point out the mRNA vaccines. The line is connecting to this particular oval shape. That includes the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine that we're pretty familiar with right now. I'm going to spend a little bit more time, quite a bit more time, talking about the Pfizer vaccine, somewhat more about Moderna as well. The viral vector vaccines, these are the CARs I was mentioning to you, essentially viruses that have been modified in such a way that they do not replicate, but they do allow the mRNA for the spike protein to get shuttled into the cell and to induce the immune response. That includes the AstraZeneca vaccine and the J&J vaccine, as well as the Sputniks and a vaccine called PaxVac. There are several inactivated vaccines. These are really not being embraced so much in Western countries, but they're listed here because they are authorized or approved in some countries of the world. And then finally, there currently are two that are authorized or approved that are protein subunit vaccines, not listed here because it's not yet authorized or approved, is the vaccine that I was mentioning to you before. That's the nanoparticle vaccine, one that will be worth paying attention to and thinking about as we hear more about it over these next several weeks and months. So let's talk just a bit about the five biggies, if you will: the Pfizer vaccine, Moderna vaccine, J&J, AstraZeneca, and this Novavax vaccine that I was just referring to. We've already talked about the platforms. Pfizer and Moderna are mRNA vaccines. Janssen, J&J, and AstraZeneca are the adenovirus replication incompetent, meaning, in other words, it cannot reproduce itself. It goes into the cell and then ultimately releases the mRNA for the spike protein and then doesn't cause any issues thereafter. And then Novavax, which is the protein subunit vaccine that is stabilized and expressed inside the cells once it gets in there. I want to point out one thing that is a difference. AstraZeneca uses the mRNA encodes for what's called a wild type spike protein, whereas these others use a mRNA that encodes what's known as a stabilized spike protein. And that may explain some of the difference that we see with AstraZeneca against some of the variants. By stabilizing the spike protein, it generates a more reliable and more robust, it appears, immune response relative to what the AstraZeneca vaccine that does not use a stabilized spike protein mRNA is able to do. Essentially, the stabilization makes the conformation of the spike protein hold in a certain form so that the body's immune response can recognize it and generate that more robust, more long-lasting, more strong type of immune response. Whereas the wild type spike protein that the AstraZeneca vaccine employs is a little bit more conformationally flexible. And as a consequence, it doesn't seem to be generating quite as robust an immune response. We don't have AstraZeneca in the United States, I don't know whether we will or not at this particular time. Novavax is not available yet anywhere, but I think it will be one that we'll be watching and will ultimately be available, certainly in many countries in the world and perhaps in the United States. Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Novavax are 2 doses in order to be fully vaccinated. J&J is a single dose. That's a big benefit for J&J. They are studying 2 doses separated by about 2 months, but for right now, it is a single dose. The current status for Pfizer is that it is authorized by emergency use authorization by the Food and Drug Administration for administration to adolescents and adults 12 years of age and older. Moderna has an EUA for adults, as does J&J. AstraZeneca is supposedly planning an EUA submission, but there's some complexities there, and FDA is laid out some additional information that it would want to see from AstraZeneca. So I'm not sure how that path forward is gonna look. And Novavax is anticipating a submission, whether it's going to be an EUA or a full BLA for approval by FDA is not quite clear at this time either. Now, for adolescents, Pfizer has been authorized for use in 12 and above, so that approval or that authorization of the EUA was done on May 10th. The EUA for Moderna to go down to 12 years of age was filed on June 10th and is under review. It would not surprise me if, within the next couple of weeks, we receive information from FDA as to whether they authorize the Moderna vaccine down to 12 years of age as well. And then J&J is expanding into the teenage populations. For the younger children, both Pfizer and Moderna are well underway with their under 12-year studies, initially 5 through 11 years, and then 2 through 4, and then ultimately 6 months through 1 year of age, up to 2 years of age, in other words. And I would anticipate, this is me guessing here, I would anticipate that Pfizer and Moderna will have data available for use in 5 through 11-year-olds, maybe as soon as September, October-ish range. So I would anticipate, right now we have Pfizer. Soon I expect we'll have Moderna for adolescents. We can still get them vaccinated before school starts. For the 5 through 11-year-olds, that isn't going to happen before school starts, but it won't be far into the school year, in my judgment, as to when that authorization will be received, or likely will be received, because none of us have a crystal ball, but I would anticipate that. And that then makes the 2021-2022 school year night and day compared with the 2020-2021 school year. All right, let's talk some about how these vaccines, the Pfizer, the Moderna, the J&J, those 3 that are authorized in the United States, how they look specifically initially in adults. And then I'm going to give a lot more information about the Pfizer vaccine and how it looks in adolescents. So what I've done in this particular slide is a comparison of the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, and the J&J vaccine. Each of these columns is separated out in the first percentage grouping for in Pfizer's case, 16 through 55 years, and the second grouping over 55 years. For Moderna, it was 18 through 64 and greater than 64. For J&J, it was 18 through 59 and greater than 59 years. And that's where these percentages that you kind of see separated by a comma in each of the columns. The first percentage is referring to the younger population, usually younger adults to middle-aged adults, except for Pfizer, which includes some of the very much older adolescents of 16 and 17-year-olds. And the second one is in older adults. 55 is a threshold, 59 is a threshold, 64 is a threshold. These data are from the ACIP meetings. I mentioned the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices prior, on a prior slide, or from the VRBPAC meeting. VRBPAC is the FDA Advisory Committee that also has open meetings and from which data can be redacted and extracted. Several of these data sets also now have been published in peer-reviewed literature. I like there's a little bit more thorough, robust depth to the data from these open meetings, and so I have left the slides to reflect that. But it's essentially the same as what's in the published manuscripts. So on each row is the different side effects: initially pain, fatigue, headache, muscle pain, joint pain, chills, fever. And then benefit, efficacy after 2 doses or efficacy after 1 dose. So how do these look? They hurt. This is like a Tdap. So it is likely, 3 out of 5 to 4 out of 5 people receiving these vaccines in their arm muscle will have a sore arm. It lasts a day or 2 and then it goes away. But that is a side effect that I do tell people you're quite likely to have. A few people don't, but most people do. Maybe a third to half, 2/3 perhaps, will have some fatigue. Between a third and half or so will have headache, muscle pains, maybe about a third overall, if you look at it, a quarter to a third. Joint pain, a little bit less common than muscle pain. Chills, usually in single digits to low double-digit kind of percentages. Moderna might have a little bit more in terms of some of the outer ranges with some chills. And fever as well, can happen, but it's single digits or low double-digit kind of likelihood. And really, it's pretty impressive how remarkably similar these 2 mRNA vaccines are to one another. And the J&J vaccine also has some some relevant reactogenicity, a little bit less than the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. Now, is this a bad thing? No, it's a good thing. What reactogenicity means is that your body is reacting to it. Part of the body's reaction to it is the immune system reaction. So reactogenicity also means immunogenicity. It means that there will be, in the people that are having that reaction, increased likelihood that their immune system's mounting a strong immune response to it. That's what we want from a vaccine. So this is a good thing, not a bad thing. Now, how beneficial are these? What's the efficacy of these? If you look 7 days after dose 2, and so since it's Pfizer and Moderna, the 2 on this slide that have 2 doses, J&J only has 1 dose. This doesn't apply to J&J. But if you look at 7 days or more after dose 2, these vaccines are incredibly effective, 95%, 94% effective, and 100% effective in the studies against severe disease. Now, in the real world setting, that 100% becomes 97% or something like that, because not everything works in every single person. But that is still remarkably good. I would have been happy if our vaccines that we would be talking about today had hit 50%. That would have made me feel good. That we see 95%, 80%, 100%, and kind of numbers. Those are unbelievable numbers. They are remarkable numbers. And it's the reason right now that we don't have as much COVID disease in our communities, because enough people have been getting these vaccines or had COVID before they got the vaccine or were offered the vaccine. And that has generated a degree of immunity within the population. That's a good thing. Now, what do we know about the durability of that immunity? With wild type disease, the durability is less. In other words, how long you stay protected against getting the virus again is a shorter period of time than appears to be the case with the vaccine-induced immunity. So it is, even if somebody's had COVID before, they should still get the vaccine if it's age appropriate, if they're 12 and over. They should still get the vaccine, because that then will generate the even stronger immune response that will protect them over the longer period of time. Now, if we look at efficacy after one dose, the numbers are a little bit less when it comes to the mRNA vaccines. And against severe disease for the J&J vaccine, 85%, again, outstanding, exceptional kind of responsiveness. These are all in adults, with the exception of Pfizer, these data also including 16 and 17-year-olds. So let's look at a couple of graphs. The first is going to be for the Pfizer vaccine. And what you see on this slide is time on the x-axis and the cumulative number of cases of COVID disease or COVID infection on the y-axis. So you want to be lower down on the y-axis, not higher up. This is for the mRNA Pfizer vaccine, 2 vaccine doses separated by 21 days. And you can see that essentially by about 10 days, these 2 lines start to separate. And they separate because the group in kind of this reddish color did not get the vaccine. They got a placebo. Whereas the group in blue got initially 1 dose of vaccine, and then at 21 days got a 2nd dose of vaccine. And I mean, just look at this slide. This visually is showing why these vaccines are working. The separation and the continued climb of virus acquisition, disease, in other words, and infection in the placebo group versus the flat line of those who got the Pfizer vaccine. Similarly, for the Moderna vaccine, looking at the same kind of graph, time on the x-axis, cumulative percent event rate on the y-axis. For Moderna, there's a 28-day separation in dosing. Again, around day 10, these 2 lines start to separate. The group getting placebo, not getting the active vaccine, going up and up and up and up and up in terms of the likelihood of getting COVID disease or COVID infection. The group getting the Moderna vaccine just staying flat down near the x-axis because of the high degree of protection that they have. And then finally, looking at the J&J vaccine, same kind of thing. This is a single dose vaccine. So they get the dose on the time on the x-axis, they get the dose right here, right around 10 days or so, you start seeing the separation where the group getting placebo is more and more and more and more likely to get infected and have disease, whereas the group getting the J&J vaccine flattens out. And you see the clear difference in terms of benefit, having less disease for persons getting the J&J vaccine. And then looking at severe COVID, critical COVID with J&J, similar kind of thing, although the line separated about day 7, and remarkably different trajectories here as to whether someone got active vaccine or whether they got no vaccine at all because they were randomized to placebo. All right, now I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about adolescents. So what my intent with those first slides was to give you background of how good these vaccines are, and hopefully to influence you to be a trusted messenger on the vaccine within your community, among your friends, and with your family. Because ultimately, I truly believe that the role that each of you all play in your schools, your relatively schools or school buildings or school systems, that can really be leveraged for remarkable good. Parents will ask you, they will listen to you, they will watch you about what you do. And if you've gotten the vaccine and you share that with others and you encourage them to, that it wasn't going to change everybody's mind, but it will influence some people. The data are pretty consistent that our best hope for moving the bar up in terms of number of people getting vaccinated now is to increasingly utilize trusted messengers. That can be pediatricians, it can be school nurses, it can be friends who understand the science of these vaccines and what the data are showing. And they say, look, I got the vaccine. I want you to have the same benefit that I'm getting as well. Or I'm worried about what's happening in our community. Please go get the vaccine, because if you get infected with the Delta variant, for instance, things aren't going to go well for you. That kind of thing is what I was really trying with this first set of slides to compel you or convey to you, encourage you to become more vocal. Don't be belligerent. Don't bash. If people say, no, I'm not going to do it, and they've heard you out, then okay. I mean, that you're not a policeman. But on the other hand, you are someone with special training, with a special position. And I really encourage you to use that, because the sooner we get to higher vaccination rates, the sooner this truly is in the rearview mirror. Right now, it feels like it is. We're going into Walmart, we're going into Dick's Sporting Goods, we're going into the grocery store without masks, we're going back to concerts, we're going, on trips on planes and so on and so forth. And I would love it if it stays that way. I really would. We should celebrate where we are. It's good. Is it going to stay that way? At best, that's an open-ended question right now. And at worst, the answer is no, it's not going to stay that way. This virus is not gone. This virus can come back at any moment. And so we cannot fully let our guard down without being back, maybe not to where we were in December and January, but where we were in March, for instance, thousands, hundreds to thousands of people dying every day in the United States. That's not completely behind us, I fear. The way to get there is through vaccination. So let's talk about adolescent vaccines. This is going to be Pfizer because it's the only one that's authorized for 12 and over right now. And this is what we know about the studies that were done in adolescents, and specifically the second column and third column from the left are the group of 12 to 15-year-olds getting the Pfizer vaccine compared with 16 through 25-year-olds getting the Pfizer vaccine, and for placebo, 12 through 15 and 16 through 25. The gender breakdown, the racial breakdown, the ethnicity breakdown, and then country. Now you'll see that the country for the adolescent vaccination, 12 through 15, I should say, younger adolescent vaccination study, it was done in the United States and consisted of about 1,130 adolescents in each of the two groups. So about 2,250 overall in the study. And the comparators were from studies that were done around the world, including the United States. Somewhere around 70% of enrollees for the comparator groups of the little bit older adolescents to young adults in the US. That also is reflected in the ethnicity. About 90% of the enrollees in the adolescent study, the younger adolescent study, 12 through 15, were non-Hispanic, whereas about 2/3 were non-Hispanic in the older adolescent and the young adult study. So you can just kind of see overall, these look quite balanced across each of the categories on the various rows. Looking at local events within 7 days from dose 1 and dose 2. Dose 1 is the upper graph, dose 2 is the lower graph. Percentage is on the y-axis, so this is the percentage of people following dose 1 that had these local events: redness, swelling, pain at the injection site. From dose 2, again, the percentage with redness, swelling, pain at the injection site. then breaking it down within each of these groups for redness, for swelling, for pain, breaking it down to the younger adolescents and the older adolescents and younger adults, younger adolescents, older adolescents, and younger adults. And you can see that you see some redness, single digits, some swelling, single digits. It really is the pain at the injection site that's what's recognized among people receiving the vaccine. And it was the same in the older adolescent, the young adult, as it is in the younger adolescent. These percentages are remarkably similar. Green is mild symptoms, blue is moderate, gray is severe. You don't see much gray at all here, just little slivers. So this is mostly mild to moderate kind of effects. And you do interestingly see, as through the placebo effect, you see, about 1 in 6 to 1 in 4 placebo recipients having the similar kind of thing, even though all they got was saline injected into their muscle. Then looking at systemic events within 7 days of dose 1. So this is within 7 days of dose 1 only, not dose 2. That'll be on the next slide. The group getting active vaccine in the upper graph, the group getting placebo in the lower graph, percentage on the y-axis, the breakdown on the x-axis of younger adolescent versus older adolescent and young adult, younger adolescent, older adolescent, young adult, and so forth across. Fever, fatigue, headache, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, muscle pain, joint pain represented on this particular slide. And you can see really it's the headache and the fatigue that is really the main player. About a quarter will have chills, and about a quarter will have some muscle pain. But again, similar. Some of these are also occurring in placebo recipients. So that's sort of the mental perception that I'm likely to have some fatigue after getting this vaccine is reflected there. But clearly, there's more fatigue, there's more headache in the group getting active vaccine, and that would be both for the younger adolescent and the older adolescent, young adult. They look really quite similar. Now, doing the same sort of thing, but looking after dose 2. As was seen in the adult studies, these systemic reactogenicity events are more likely after dose 2 than after dose 1. And again, it's fatigue, headache, maybe a little bit more chills and a little bit more muscle pain as well. So let's now talk about what kind of immune reaction or immune response these vaccines generate. This was really this and the safety data I just showed you were the main goals of the adolescent study that Pfizer conducted. And what I'm showing on this slide are the geometric mean titers. That's the amount of antibody to SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID disease, the amount of that antibody response for those getting the BNT vaccine, that's the active vaccine, and those getting placebo in the younger adolescent age group, and in the comparator group, it's older adolescent and young adult, getting the vaccine in kind of the darker purple color, getting placebo in the lighter purple color. So what I want to show you here is that, day 1 is the day they first get vaccinated. So you're not going to have much in the way of antibody response here, and it's pretty similar across all, just some little background noise there. But look at it 52 days after getting the vaccine. And this would be after, since it's 52 days, it would be after getting dose 1 on day 1 and dose 2 on day 21. And you can see a much higher immune response in the group getting active vaccine that are younger adolescents versus the placebo group in the younger adolescent group. Likewise, similar high antibody response, which is exactly what you want. This is what's giving you the protection against becoming infected or having disease if you're exposed to wild type virus later on. That same kind of high elevation of the bar in the older adolescent, young adult compared with those getting placebo. Now, other thing I want you to notice is that this number 1283 is a larger number than 730. I mean, it's almost twice the amount of 730 times 2 would be 1460. This is 1283. And yet these bars look very similar in height. And the reason is because this is a logarithmic scale on the y-axis. 10 to the first, 10 to the second, or what you thought? 10 to the second on the y-axis, 10 to the third, which is 1,000, 10 to the fourth, which is 10,000. So if instead of this logarithmic axis, we then look at the geometric mean ratio for the geometric mean titers of the younger adolescent and the older adolescent and young adult. This is about the 1200, about the 700. You see that the younger adolescents actually generate an even more robust immune response compared with the older adolescents and adults, young adults, with about a 1.75-fold higher antibody response. Again, a good thing when we look at degree of protection. What is that protection? Well, this was not a huge study. 2250 is a good size, but it's not an absolutely enormous size like the earlier adult studies were that had 40,000 people in them. But what was seen here is the evaluable efficacy from 7 days after dose 2. This is in the large number of enrollees 12 through 15 years of age who did not have evidence of prior infection. They've never had COVID infection before, in other words. There were 16 in the placebo group that went ahead and did get COVID disease 7 days or more after dose 2. There were none in the group getting placebo for a vaccine efficacy of 100%. And then if you loop in not only those without prior infection, but also include those with prior infection or without, 18 in the placebo group, none in the vaccinated group. Again, a vaccine efficacy of 100%. Now, today, when I'm recording this and you're listening to this, is July 7, 2021, and this will be posted with these slides for people that are viewing this in a kind of banked way, with a library kind of viewing. One of the things that we are hearing a lot about is myocarditis. Now, whether a month from now we're hearing about it, who knows? But for right now we are, and I thought that we should talk about that with 1 or 2 slides here to discuss what we know about this. This is the incidence or the risk of myocarditis or pericarditis. Myocarditis is inflammation of the heart muscle. Pericarditis is inflammation of the lining around the heart, the pericardium around the heart. Per million doses, dose 1 or dose 2, per million dose 1s or per million dose 2s within 21 days of either dose 1 or dose 2. It's looking at all and then breaking out into females and males. So with the risk seems to be higher. There is a risk here. It's a very, very small risk, but it's there. And so we need to look at it and understand it and put it in, I would suggest, perspective and balance. And that's what I'm hoping to do with these slides. So let's look at dose 2, because that's where there's a larger risk. Overall, about 12.5 cases per million doses. For females, 4.7 cases per million doses, dose 2s. For males, 32 per million. So if you take 32 per million and you take 1 million and divide it by 32, that gives you the number per X second doses. 1 in 31,250 second doses will have myocarditis or pericarditis. 1 in 31,250 second doses. Your chance of getting struck by lightning in your lifetime is 1 in 15,300, people. So essentially, it's not the best comparison, but it does help me anyway to think about where does 1 in 31,250 stand in terms of what I judge the likelihood of something happening to me to be, and one we use a lot is being struck by lightning. You're twice as likely to be struck by lightning than you are to develop myocarditis or pericarditis after dose 2 in this 21-day window period of time. Again, not the most scientifically sound comparison, but nevertheless one that I think has some value to it. So I wanted to mention it for that reason. The other thing I want to point out is that the cases of myocarditis are mild. To what we know right now, these are the kinds of things that are either not treated at all, or they're treated with some ibuprofen, or maybe gamma globulin. A few cases are receiving gamma globulin or some immunological modulating kind of things. But they stay in the hospital on average for 2 days. They go home and they recover. And as far as we know right now, there's no long-term sequelae, although we need to know more about this and we'll be following it over time. So let's look at this again, looking at it, kind of in a risk benefit sort of way. This is hospitalizations prevented on the left side of the figure versus myocarditis cases on the right-hand side of the figure by age over the 4-month period of time after vaccination per million doses. So here is the small sliver of myocarditis that you may see in adolescents, young adults, still young adults, a little bit more middle-aged adults, versus the hospitalizations that are prevented in those same age groups. And raw number is on the x-axis, moving out from 0 in either direction. And then finally, looking not only at hospitalizations prevented, but also overall COVID cases prevented, ICU admissions prevented, deaths prevented, and myocarditis cases attributable to a second dose of vaccine within 4 months after second dose per million second doses. You can look at female adolescents, male adolescents, female young adults, male young adults, and then the 24 through 29, which I would consider still young adults, but not quite as young as 18 through 24 or to 24. And you can see how many cases are prevented, 5,700 to 15,000. Hospitalizations prevented, hundreds to up to 1,500 or so. ICU admissions prevented, scores up to 215. Deaths prevented, and myocarditis cases. And the judgment of the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is that and we also know that if you get COVID disease, you also can get myocarditis, and it happens more frequently than myocarditis following vaccination. So the judgment of the AAP and the CDC currently is that the benefits of vaccination clearly outweigh the risks, and therefore the encouragement is for all adolescents, unless there's some restriction, which basically means, allergic reaction to the vaccine, which you wouldn't have ever had before. So essentially it means all adolescents should be getting this vaccine. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to be open to any kind of questions that you may have. I will pause while we're getting set up to be able to take some of these questions, and also mention the variants that we're seeing so much about it. Is this the real deal? Yes. Now, is Delta going to remain the real deal? Is that going to be our main variant of concern or variant of focus over time? Right now it is, and for the foreseeable future, I would suggest that it probably will be. But think about where the Delta variant came from. It came from India when they had their massive surge in April, May, around that range. So it didn't exist before then. And the reason it was able to develop is because a whole lot of people in India got infected because they didn't have enough vaccine in India to prevent infection. So until we have not only vaccination statuses in the US that are much higher than where we are right now, but also in the world higher than where it is now, we are all at risk. What happens, in Asia impacts us. What happens in Europe impacts us. What happens in South America impacts us. What happens in Africa impacts us. It's in our best interest to get not only ourselves vaccinated, but get the world vaccinated, so that I heard an interesting analogy here, that each unvaccinated person who gets the virus, gets infected with the virus, becomes a little factory for making mutant viruses potentially, that then learn how to spread more easily to other people. That's what the Delta variant is doing, or causes more severe disease in people. That's what the Alpha variant did, what maybe the Delta variant is doing as well. The virus is trying to get better than our immune responses. And right now, the immunity induced by the vaccines, the mRNA vaccines and the J&J vaccine, is sufficient to overcome the viruses, the variant viruses even. But whether that stays over time is an open question. We got the clock running right now, in other words. So what's my message? Get vaccinated. Happy to take questions.
You have 3 in there, up there in the box. If you can read them out first for us.
Okay, first one, do you know if the vaccine is a one-time vaccine, or will it have to be taken yearly like the flu vaccine? So essentially, I think what it's asking about is boosters. The Pfizer and Moderna are technically two-time vaccines because you have to get 2 doses. The J&J is a one-time vaccine, 1 dose. But what the question is getting at is, are we going to need booster doses over time? And we've begun looking at that. The honest answer is, I don't know. Nobody knows. There have been some really intriguing studies, extremely well done studies that have characterized the immunologic response following vaccination. They were published like in Nature. I mean, the best of the journals in the world. And in it, like I forget the number, 12 or 14 people underwent serial bone marrow biopsies. So I mean that's why there weren't very many people in the study. But you know they'd have these big trochanter needles put into their hip bones to have bone marrow pulled out so they could really characterize the immune response in those people, and it looks phenomenal. So a couple of things. When someone is vaccinated with the mRNA vaccines, that's where we have more data. So that's what I'm going to talk about. When they're vaccinated with the mRNA vaccines, the vaccine response initially, which is occurring in your arm muscle, in your lymph nodes, maybe under your armpit, that kind of thing. That immune response is learning very quickly how to focus in on the spike protein of the coronavirus that causes COVID. And then over time, and this is a bit of a surprise to me, over time, it doesn't just stay focused on that, but it learns how to recognize related spike proteins. So that when these variants are developing, for right now, the immune response as it matures actually becomes broader, not more narrow over time. And that's good news for us. And the durability of that response in these really well characterized studies involving really small numbers of people, the durability looks like it may even be years. Some models project out to a lifetime. Now, what will that mean in the real world? Does that mean that we won't have boosters? My guess, if I had to guess, long-winded answer to a question, I would say that some people will get booster doses. I don't know if it'll be annually or every 2 years. I think they will be people with weakened immune systems. So it might be the elderly whose immunosenescence, their immune system just isn't as robust as a younger person's immune system. It may be them. It may be people on cancer treatment or biologic modifiers, like anakinra or whatever it may be, something for rheumatoid arthritis as an example, Crohn's disease, those kinds of things. People in whom, in other words, you can't be sure that their immune system was robust in its response to begin with. That's my guess. It wouldn't surprise me if we also ended up with immunocompetent people needing boosters, but right now based on what we have in front of us, I would guess we probably won't need that. Wouldn't surprise me if we do, so I'm hedging on that part of it. Next question. I noticed that Moderna and Pfizer's efficacy against all infections seems higher after 1 dose than J&J's 1-dose vaccine. Can I speak to that? Are patients better off getting 1 dose of Pfizer or Moderna's vax than choosing J&J's? Very good question. The best vaccine for a given person is the one that they can get in their arm. Let me say it again. The best vaccine for John Smith is the one that John Smith can get that day. And whether it's J&J or Pfizer or Moderna, it doesn't matter. These were not head-to-head studies. Moderna and Pfizer were done a little bit earlier in the pandemic compared with J&J. By the time J&J was being studied, there were variants already that were beginning to circulate around the world. And so that might explain some of the J&J response. The other thing to remember that numerically is different, but from the practical standpoint, when you get up to numbers that good, any of these 3 are great vaccines to receive, any of them. If you don't like needles and you want 1 shot, get the J&J. If you are taking care of an adolescent in your practice and they're coming in for a high school physical and you're not likely to see them again for another year, get the J&J. If you have it in your office, use that or send them to CVS or wherever to get it, Walgreens. The other thing to keep in mind is the one-time numbers after Pfizer and Moderna were that the window of time between dose 1 and dose 2. So it was a 21-day window of time for Pfizer and a 28-day window of time for Moderna. And so it's not an indefinite. Just because you had an 80% number for Pfizer, I believe it was, following dose 1, doesn't mean that if you didn't give dose 2 and checked it again at month 2 or month 3, you're still going to be at 80%, if that makes sense. So it's a limited window of time. It's a good number to see. It means that it means where those curves that I showed and spent so much time on around day 10 or day 7 begin to separate. That's what we're seeing in the post-dose 1 data with numbers with Pfizer and with Moderna. When we are ready for a booster, will we be able to use a different vaccine than we initially had taken? I don't know. There are some interesting studies that are underway right now. The data are very preliminary, but it suggests that it's at least not inferior to give, if you got J&J to begin with, to give an mRNA vaccine as a booster. But really the data are not back yet. So by the time we get to the point of thinking about boosters, we will know the answer to that question. It's a very good question. Right now, the recommendation is if you get an mRNA vaccine, a Pfizer vaccine as dose 1, get the Pfizer as dose 2. If you get Moderna dose 1, get Moderna dose 2. You don't need a dose 2 if you get J&J. And then we just wait and see. If someone received the first dose of Moderna vaccine but missed the second dose, what do they need to do? They need to get their second dose. The time window that I mentioned, the 21 days for Pfizer, 28 days for Moderna, that's a minimum time. There are, if you look on the CDC website, recommendations that dose 2, if you missed your day 21 for Pfizer or your day 28 for Moderna, that you give it within 6 weeks. But that's a made up number. They do that simply because they've got to give some upper limit to it. They can't just say, 18 years from now, get your dose 2, because that's obviously kind of ludicrous to think about that. So right now, where we are in the pandemic, if you missed your dose 2 on day 21 or day 28, depending on the vaccine that you received, get it as soon as you can after that time period. What do the studies show regarding geometric mean titers for natural immunity with those who have antibodies from COVID infection as it compares with vaccine studies? That's an excellent question. The immune response, the amount of antibody, the height of the antibody response following vaccination is larger than following wild type disease, and it lasts longer than wild type disease. So right now, so let me finish that comment before I move to the next. So vaccines are better than wild type disease and a whole lot less risky, because people die with wild type disease, or they end up with, post-COVID syndromes where they have brain fog and things like that. So the vaccine is by far the safer way to go. And it's not only because the immune response is broader, higher, steeper, larger, bigger than wild type disease, but it also lasts longer than wild type disease. There also are some data that for those people that got COVID, hopefully before the vaccines were available, because otherwise, they should have been vaccinated, that those people get dose 1 and dose 2 of the vaccine, and they even have a better immune response. So they might theoretically even have longer protection. It's theoretical, we don't know that for sure. Please don't go out and try to get the disease before you get the vaccine. That would be counterproductive and dangerous. Get the vaccine. But for those like two of my children who are young adults now, 2 of them had COVID last year, 2020, and they, all 3 of them have been vaccinated, and they maybe even have more stronger protection. I hope they do, because my dad, their grandfather in November, died of COVID. So this has touched my family very directly, and I don't want it to touch other families. It's touched 600,000 American families so far. We need to keep that number as low now that we've reached that terrible threshold as possible. Are people who have had COVID in the past and still have some antibodies, do they have some protection against the Delta variant? I don't know the answer to that. The data would suggest that their protection is less than the protection following the vaccine, following Pfizer vaccine, for instance, against Delta variant. But some of that is kind of anecdotal. It's saying, look, I know we've described X number of people who had COVID in late 2020 and now are infected with the Delta variant. That is well described. Is it as well characterized as the degree of protection following the COVID vaccination in those that have gotten vaccinated, in other words, recipients of the COVID vaccine? Probably not. And we need, even better data still to be generated over time. I think the main takeaway right now, though, is it's not too late to get vaccinated. It can be done prior to the starting of the school year if you're an adolescent, and you should get vaccinated. It's the best way to avoid the shutdowns in schools, to avoid, having to be quarantined at home if you have an exposure, missing school, doing Zoom for your classes. The best way to get back to football games, the best way to get back, to hanging out on the mall with your friends, the best way to get back to math class, which I know they all love, and is to get vaccinated. And these are safe vaccines. It'll cause a sore arm. So what? I mean, after 2 days, it's gone. These are healthy young men that are, bench pressing a whole lot of weight. They're going to have sore muscles anyway. They're used to that. So I really recommend, obviously, that this be something that we all get, and that y'all advocate for. Second, final question, I guess, probably. I was vaccinated in February of this year with 2 doses of Pfizer. I tested positive for COVID this summer. What does my immunity most likely look like now? Well, unknown from this as to whether you were symptomatic when you tested positive. The vaccines they're remarkably effective, period, but nothing is absolutely foolproof. And so what I'm hoping is the person who wrote this was not very sick from getting COVID. And if that was the case, it highly was likely because of the vaccine. That in other words, you had that degree of protection. I would imagine that getting the breakthrough infections, like what this is describing, that breakthrough infection boosted your immune system up some more, like a booster dose might do. And therefore, I would expect you to have an even stronger immunity right now. I'm guessing, obviously, none of us that have a crystal ball to be able to peer into somebody's body and figure that out. But that would make biologic and immunologic sense to me. All right, I'm looking over to my master over here. She says we have no more questions. I want to thank you all for your time and your attention. I want you please to remember that you all are trusted messengers, that you all play a significant role in your communities, a role that the rest of us don't play. And please use that. Please use your platform to advocate for this. We are in a race against time. It is not inconceivable that we will go back to masking in the fall, that we will go back to social distancing and not being in church together by the time the winter comes. It is not inconceivable that that's a possibility. It's not written in stone that it is a possibility. And the best way to make sure it's never written in stone is to get vaccinated. So I don't know how much more plain than that. I appreciate your time here, and it's the sermon. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.